Dear Oliver, thank you very much for taking your time and record this conversation with me. Much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Before we start looking into the book and the experience of the tercentenary, may I ask you how did your Masonic journey started?
Just like so many fellow Masons, is the simple answer to that. My father was a Mason, and he introduced me to Masonry. He proposed me to a lodge of which he was a joining member, and so that, of course, became my mother lodge, and that was quite nearly 40 years ago. And sadly, he's now deceased. But my masonry continues, and it remains a very important part of my life.
And if I'm not wrong, we can actually have your father in picture, and is the painting in your background. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. Yes. Now I have a portrait of him in this room, and there it is behind me with his wig on. He was a barrister, as you can suppose.
Yeah.
And so his mother lodge was the Chancery Bar Lodge, which has had many interesting members in it, including Graham Redman, who many people will know.
Oliver, we are here to celebrate your work, the book about the tercentenary of English Freemason, and what an opportunity, a once in a lifetime event, 300 years, and what a ceremony. From what I could see from the pictures, it's just mind blowing how the whole thing came together. However, something like this doesn't come easy. And what I would be fascinated to learn is how did the journey for the tercentenary started, and who were the team members that worked with you to achieve such a wonderful ceremony?
It was a very long journey, I can tell you that. It started years before the event, and quite right too, of course. You have to for something of that scale. And it included, of course, the setting up of committees and the writing of plans and so on, and much of which was nothing to do with me at all. But I well remember, I think my first direct contact was about 4 years before the event, something like that. When I had lunch in the city with Jerry Hann, the late Jerry Hann, and one of the sad stories about the tercentenary is that Jerry Hann, who began as the chairman of the tercentenary committee, did not live to see the event, and so he nevertheless laid important foundations and deserves to be remembered in this context. But a real tragedy for him and of course his family that he never lived to see it. But many others did, of course, and what a very special event it was. I mean, it was amazing. I couldn't begin to tell you who was involved because there were just so many hundreds of people and in no sense were they all part of some team of mine. Quite a large number of people were working under my direction, but there were the theatrical stream, as it were, was something completely different and totally separate. And it's quite remarkable how little was known by those who weren't involved in that side about what was actually going to happen on the stage. I mean, as we sat down in the Albert Hall on that day, we saw the most amazing, wonderful performance led by Sir Derek Jacobi, as you no doubt know.
Yes.
And had almost no idea of what was to come. So it was really quite, well, it was an enormous pleasure, but also quite a surprise in many respects. So it was great fun.
I agree. I mean, it looked to me like a mosaic. Everybody had a part, and then suddenly everything comes together. You get this beautiful, emotional moment where you represent or you celebrate these 300 years. If you look back in time, so you had the theoretical part, the beginning of the journey, the discussion about what could have been done in your part, etc. Then you actually experience the ceremony. Is there a particular moment that you enjoyed the most, that marked you, that make you, think like, wow, we are in the middle of this event, historical event?
I think probably the moment I enjoyed the most was when I sat down to dinner. it was, it was a really, it was very intense, is I think the way to describe it. Because when you have a part to play in the organising and the running of something like this, you have to be very, very focused throughout it, because you got to be ready to pick up the bits if anything does go wrong. You have a part to play, and you can't afford to make a mess of it, and because you just let everybody down if you do. So that is totally unacceptable. So you're constantly trying to remind yourself of what's going to happen next, what it is you need to be ready for, what it is you need to do, where you need to be, and so on. And you can't all the time be looking at your timetable.
Yeah.
So, but thankfully, and another thing that I didn't really know was going to happen, on the stage there were teleprompters all the way around it, which I don't think anybody in the seats could actually see, which is rather remarkable.
Yeah.
It was a great bonus, no doubt about it, and not something that I had anticipated, and of course, therefore, not something that one could afford to depend on. But what a great help!
If you look into the way that the brethren participated, I mean, you were part of the team that deployed it. Did you have the feeling that the people that were there as audience were actually taken into this emotional journey or everything that you build up? Did you have that feeling that people were into the moment? Did you manage to create that atmosphere?
I think so. I mean, I don't think that I created it, but I think it was created. Yes, yes, and I don't think of them as the audience. I think that everybody who was there was a participant of the various different sorts.
Yeah,
and so, and I'm sure that that's how they would have felt too. I mean, it was a Masonic meeting, albeit that we were, of course, called off because we had to be in order to be able to do what we were doing there on the stage. But everyone had their Masonic regalia on, and practically everybody present in the hall was a Mason.
Oliver, like you just said, I really like the comment that you made that at the festive board afterwards, you could actually feel that the journey was almost getting completed. Now time passed. Have you met with some of your team member or the other people, the other brethren that worked into this preparation, and you went through those memories? What does it remain the most? I mean, the effort, the moment, the emotion, the pictures that were created. What did come out as the strongest memory that you have with the people that were involved like you?
That's a remarkably difficult question, because I think the answer is that different people had very different involvement in different aspects of it. So the involvement of one person was to make sure that everything was ready for the opening and the closing in the Queen's dressing room, which was where we opened and closed in the Albert Hall. And I suspect that for him, that will be the principal memory, actually, because that was the bit where he had to be ready for the Grandmaster and for the Pro Grandmaster and so on and so on. For others, of course, it will be what was happening on the stage and their part in that, whether they were actually on the stage or whether they were there in the arena, or whether they were visitors who were sitting in some of the the boxes around the Grand Tier and so on.
Yeah.
So, but equally, there were other aspects of it. So if you ask the Lord Mayor what his recollection would be, it would be when we all went to the Mansion House.
Yeah.
Which, as you may know, we did, it's all in the book, which we did the evening before the main event at the Albert Hall. And earlier in the day, we had the Grandmaster's reception, where our Grandmaster had received 128 Grandmasters from other constitutions. And that was a unique event. So everybody's recollections will differ because of their particular involvement.
Exactly.
Yeah. When any of them look at the pictures, then they will, I hope, see aspects of it that they remember well. And in some cases, they'll probably find themselves in the photographs, but they'll also that part of the series of events will be the one that stands out in their mind.
Now let's go and zoom in into the book. I mean, the journey started 4 years before for you. Did you decide to write the book 4 years at the beginning of the journey? Did you decide to write the book at the ceremony day or afterwards? What's the story about the book?
It was comfortably afterwards. I, as far as I'm aware, no one had even raised the issue of having a book about it until afterwards. And really what drove my interest and determination on this was the existence of the photographs that Chris Allerton had taken at the various different events that were all there at the end of October that year, 2017. And I knew, because I had worked quite closely with Chris, that there were hundreds and probably thousands actually of photographs that he had taken, which had never been seen. They simply never been published. They'd never been shown. And the thought that such an important event should go with its record basically out of sight was really rather sad. And so really quite soon after the tercentenary, I suggested the idea, but it didn't really get very much support. So I sort of thought, all right, perhaps I won't do anything. But then, as a little time passed, I realised that the photographs were never going to find a home unless someone like me decided to do something about it. And secondly, I realised that there was no real memento of those historic events. And people had the brochure, but a brochure is obviously produced in advance, so it's not the same thing as a retrospective. And the book, of course, contains many, many pictures, as well as a certain amount of text, but many, many pictures of the events. And that, I think, is probably the most interesting aspect of the memento. And my jottings in between are there as the glue to hold the pictures together, to set the scene. And also, literally just to give my own personal perspective of it, which may or may not be of interest, but there it is. It's there for anyone if they wish to read the text in the book. It's all that.
Like you said, you capture a moment from an angle like other people were looking from their own angle. So it's just a fascinating picture. Oliver, if you would take any part or aspect of the ceremony with the complexity of the different dignitaries from different countries and how they wanted to, present themselves into this event, is there any particular moment or an anecdote that you can share with us?
Well, I think what stands out in my mind was something that very nearly went horribly wrong, thanks to my own mistake. Um, we had recognized that many of the grandmasters who were visiting would bring with them wonderful gifts for our grandmaster, and indeed they did. And so the gifts, there were about 100 or even more gifts that were presented, and we had to have a process that was going to record these gifts adequately, and was going to recognize them properly, and was going to handle them reliably, and so on. And what we did not want was for people to start handing over gifts to the Grand Master in the middle of the reception, because it would have been completely chaotic. The quantities would have been difficult to handle. The records would have been all over the place, and things would have got muddled up. It would have been chaos. So we realized that we needed to have a plan for dealing with them. And the museum staff stepped up to the plate fantastically. And they managed to handle the gifts in the sense that as the grandmasters arrived with their gifts, they were very courteously separated from their gifts. But all importantly, the record was made instantaneously as to who and which Grand Lodge had presented that particular gift. It then, of course, had to be unwrapped, it had to be catalogued, and then, in the course of the 1 hour while the Grand Master was receiving the Grandmasters who were visiting, those gifts were laid out in an exhibition within Freemasons Hall, with everything catalogued and labelled. And as soon as the Grand Master came out and had removed his regalia, he was able to go and inspect all those gifts that had been presented nominally to him, of course. And by then, all of them labelled, and the director of the museum was able to show him around and talk about the gifts, because she was very knowledgeable indeed. This is Diane Clements, now retired. And she was able to comment on what she thought that the gifts were made of, and what their history appeared to be, and so on. Obviously, some of it was supposition, but it was very, very well informed supposition, and everything fell beautifully into place. Why did it nearly go wrong? Because, rather bizarrely, and I think uniquely in my experience, we were actually ready early, and fully 10 minutes. And I was so astonished, because it just doesn't happen ordinarily. I looked at my deputies and I said, look, the Grandmaster's waiting. All the Grandmasters in the Grand Temple are waiting. We've got 10 minutes to go. I don't want to keep everybody waiting. So is there any problem if we start now, early? One by one, they thought about it, and they shook their heads and so on. I said, right, all right, here we go. And they dispersed to their various positions and got ready to announce the Grand Master, and so on and so on. But the one thing that I had absolutely failed to think about was that chopped 10 minutes off the time that the museum staff were going to have to get the exhibition ready. And it absolutely was not until after we reviewed the exhibition that Diane said, thank you for No, I'm afraid these things happen, but they pulled it off. I mean, it was just fantastic. They didn't bat an eyelid. Everything fell into place as intended on that front completely, and all thanks to their readiness and their professionalism.
Writing a book, it's a very difficult exercise. I tried myself, I didn't achieve it. How did you go through the stages of it. I mean, wishing to write a book, it's there. I can feel it in the way that you were capturing that moment, absorbing that energy that was happening, etc. How easy was for you to jot down your notes and make them into a book, like you said, gluing images of that moment?
There are all sorts of comforting factors that occur to you as you set out on a journey like that. You realize that nothing is set in stone until it's gone to the printers. And so if you have second thoughts about something that you've written, you have the opportunity to make amends. So you can jot things down almost randomly, not quite, but you see what I mean. You can jot them down without undue caution, and then further down the line, when other people can offer their views and guidance and so on, you can adjust things as necessary. I'm glad to say that actually having jotted it down, a large proportion of that's managed to withstand the scrutiny that it quite properly had. But you don't, or at least I don't and didn't literally begin at the beginning, sort of plod through, because I don't think you'd ever write the first sentence if you did that, because you'd be so bothered about whether the first sentence was right, it would never get written. Yeah. So you dive in, you jump in the middle. Or at least this is how I did it. Others might be completely different. I just jumped in the middle and I started scribbling away, and continued until I felt that I had done justice to the story, and thereafter I was able in my own mind to say, okay, we've got some text that tells the story. Now let's bring together the photographs from really quite a large volume of photographs. Obviously, there was a lot of selection that had to go on at that stage. Yeah. So you select the photographs and then write a little bit about the photographs so that they had proper meaning, so that people knew what they were looking at and who they were looking at and what was going on at that particular stage and so on. It was great fun, actually. Quite hard work. Takes quite a long time. And I have to pay tribute here to Martin and Kindra Fawkes, who worked incredibly hard in getting it all into shape, and in the actual production, the printing and so on. I think they've done a magnificent job of making the Memento something that actually feels as it ought to, in the sense of being a book that I think will, I hope, will survive the passage of time, and people will say that is the record that I like to refer to because it's got pictures of this and that and so on.
It will. The quality, I agree with you. The book is brilliant, and the storytelling that glues, like you're saying. What I am curious about, if when you write something and you are up to the printing moment, like you just said, there is a lot of work. There are double checking, making sure that there is consistency across the writing. Now, with all the time that has passed, and you go back to your book and you think like, oh, that moment, that sentence that I mentioned in this part of the book with this picture, give me the warmest feeling. Is there a particular moment that you like in the book that you say, well, that I really truly capture something, I feel it still?
The actual record of the key events is the important thing. The recollections that I've put into the text are just a personal perspective, and different people, of course, will have completely different recollections of what they saw, because they saw it from a different angle. They saw it from a different area, but so this is my own view, and the pictures are my own selection from this enormous body of pictures that Chris took. So the whole thing is unashamedly my own perspective. And maybe one day somebody else will write another book about it, and we'll see somebody else's perspective, and that would be a delight. But we now, anyway, have a memento, and we have a home for those historic pictures.
Fantastic. Oliver, well, like many of those that will read the book and those that saw the book and those that participated, I mean, thank you, because the work that you did, it's like you said, it's a momentum, it's your perspective, and yet you capture that on behalf of many of us that were not there or will be able to appreciate those pictures in time. Did writing this book trigger in you the wish to write another book?
Not yet is the answer to that. So I'm not saying no, I'm not saying never, but I am saying not yet. It's a big commitment, and so it takes a lot of time, and one doesn't always have that time. But also, it requires a really enthusiastic determination.
Yeah.
It's no good trying to do that if it's not a subject that enthuses you, because I don't think you would ever finish it. So I don't, at this point, see what's going to trigger me in that way again, or next, perhaps I should say. But who knows? Maybe something will at some stage. But I mean, I didn't go into the tercentenary expecting to write a book. I can't immediately forecast something else that is going to trigger such a project. But it was a great pleasure, and it was made a great pleasure in large part by working with Martin and Kindra, because without their continuous support, I don't think it would ever have been finished, and I don't think we would have the book that we do have today.
I agree. The support that they give, it's fantastic, and I agree with you. Writing a book, it's a really hard commitment that you need to put down in order to achieve such a work. So great recognition for the work that you did for this one, Oliver. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. I really enjoyed to learn more also about the perspective that you brought into the book, and the fact of bringing together those images of such an historical moment. As a reader of books, I just like it's a great memory that will stay in time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And I hope that in time we will have another opportunity to discuss about maybe your next project, being a book or something else. I look forward for us to meet and continue our conversation.
It'll be a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.